This video is brought to you by The Perspective Arts. Have fun being creative with art, and gain fans and money along the way. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Perspective. Today is picture story time, and as you can see, we have a beautiful picture in the background. So what we do on this episode is that we look at the picture and we try to figure out what story it could possibly be telling us. And this one's pretty good for that, I think. We got the hero or villain or whatever you want for your story standing right there with a rose. And we have the small town in the back, and you got the bridge and all these plants. It's very vibrant with colors. There's definitely something you can do with this. So what I did for this episode is I wrote a story, because normally for Mondays is what I do is I write a story. Last week was a little bit special, and I'm sorry, this week's not going to be as crazy as that one, especially when I'm by myself this time, unfortunately. But what I did is I had a voiceover program that did it for me, because it's just easier than hearing my voice for the rest of the episode, I'm sure. It is a little bit scratchy, but not too bad. I did do some editing for it, so it didn't come out terrible or insane. I will be playing also the words and the script of the story, so you can read along if you want to, which I highly suggest. I suggest you actually just read it instead of listening to it. But if you want to do both, that's also good. I like the views. But in any case, let's go ahead and look at this picture real quick before we get into my story that you can listen to. It actually came out much, much better than I was originally anticipating, and went a completely different way than I thought it was going to be going. Like, I had one idea at the beginning of writing it, and then it kind of took a life of its own. And if you decide to do this, look at the picture and write a story and make a story for it, you'll be amazed too. Like, almost always, you make a story, it'll come out better than you originally thought, because your original idea that you start off with when you start writing takes a life of its own. It really does, and then it just kind of builds up. Or at least it does for me. I hope it does for you. But anyways, let's look at this picture. Like I said, we got the bridge. We have all these plants. We have like the little mini city, I think, in the background, I can call it, with the crystals going up everywhere. And we have, of course, the man or woman, depending on what you want the character to be, in the middle, holding a rose of petals flying everywhere. It's pretty interesting. So have your own ideas. Think about it right now. You can pause the video and just like really think of an idea for your own story. And what will be even more fun for you, maybe, I hope, is that, after you have your own idea, listen to my story and see how it's different. See where our paths went differently, where our perspectives are different. And, go to theperspectivearts.com and, post your story. Or, I prefer it there, but if you also want to do it in the comments, please do. Like, I would love to read your point of views with this picture and where you took it. It'd be great. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and shut up and let the video continue, and enjoy the story, everyone.
The hero from Lillidue. There is a story of a man from a beautiful world with lush gigantic plants and exotic flowers. He was said to have worn a long bright red tattered double cape, that was as red as the rose he carried. He was hunting the monster who attacked his village. You see, his village was cursed by dark magic, and its inhabitants were mostly consumed by crystals. In hopes of delaying the curse, mages in the village used their collective magic to stall the curse before completely taking hold. In doing so, the mages themselves were frozen in the crystals. The priestess of the village gave the champion of their people a bright red enchanted rose, and told him that, as long as there is a petal on this rose, you will know there is always hope. From that moment the champion rushed to defeat the monster and save his home called Lillidue. Crossing over a bridge, the champion sets off to the nearest town, knowing that they would be the next victims. If in time, he would be able to catch up to the monster and maybe also stop the imminent attack from reoccurring in the neighboring village of Chronowood. Running as fast as he can, he could see the crystals forming upward already around the giant trees that make up the village's homes. Coming up to the village, he could see the big black beast of a monster jump away from the town while looking back at him with a grin of fangs. The champion was about to run after him when heard the wailing of one of the villagers. Looking quickly over, he saw a scrawny, well-dressed young man running out of a house tree into the town centre toward an elegantly dressed woman. Crystals formed around her as she reached for a lavishly designed sword stabbed deep into a rock with runes carved around it at the very center of the town. As she froze over in the shimmering crystals, the scrawny young man ran stumbling, calling out to her with his hand reaching out. Right before he touches her, the champion pulls him away, exclaiming how he can't touch her without suffering the same fate as her. Shouting out, trying to grab her as he protested the champion's help while tears rushed down his face. The woman, with pain and sadness in her eyes, then looked over to stare into his eyes, changing her demeanor serious, as the crystals crawled up her neck and commanded him, "Use the sword of time." With those final words, crystals consumed her. Her eyes faded to grey as she was frozen in place like a shimmering crystal statue, and the man staring into those eyes fell to his knees, bellowing utter sadness. The champion let some time pass as the now silent young man releases his hands from his face to stare helplessly at the woman, before putting his hand on the other man's shoulder and asked him who she was. The young man, still staring at her, tells him with depression in his voice that she was the High Priestess Aurora, and as she was preparing for this attack, she underestimated his power and had not been strong enough to protect the village and save the sword from the monster. The champion looked around and then asked the man where the village's mages are, insisting that they could have helped protect against the monster. The man began to stand up and told the champion that she sent them to neighboring villages to help them as they would be defenseless against the monster, and thought she was strong enough to stay here on her own with my assistance. The champion looked at him puzzled and asked if he was a priest. The man shook his head, stating he was only her apprentice, and though he has power, the power of his cowardice was stronger. When the monster suddenly attacked and started enveloping everyone into crystals, the mayhem of the town scared him away like a rodent into one of the nearby house trees. Only after all was about lost and the monster left did he finally find his courage to help the High Priestess. The champion walked in front of the apprentice and asked him if he could use that newfound courage to help him defeat the monster and possibly restore everything like it was. He responded uncertainly but agreed to try anyway. The apprentice then walked around the champion up to the sword and whispered some words to the hilt before pulling it out of the stone, making the runes glow green for a moment. Watching him do this, champion asked if the power of the sword is strong enough to beat the monster, and if it is, why not use it before to defeat him? The man explained that the sword is powerful but unpredictable. Aurora told him that the sword should only be used as a last resort, as the wielder could suffer the same fate as the one it's wielded against, and that's all he knows about the sword other than it was made by the ancient wizard of time. While saying this, the apprentice strapped the sword to his belt and began to walk out of town with the champion following beside him. Walking further away from town toward a dark floating mountain a half a day's walk away, the travelers could already hear the faint crashing of thunder coming from the dark clouds surrounding it. The apprentice explained while they walked that the monster used to be a great champion in the ancient time named Zerl before being corrupted by the power of a mysterious black crystal his hunting party found in a floating mountain's cave. It's said his party of 5 went into the cave, but Zerl was the only one to come out, and even stronger than before. He said to his fellow villagers that they were attacked by a large beast and he was the only one to survive, but as time went by, people in the village started to notice people disappearing, and at the same time Zerl was becoming more aggressive, and his body was changing darker and bigger while his hands started to resemble claws. When Zerl's wife and child began to feel concerned, They went to the village chief pleading to get a mage priest to come and exorcise the demon growing in him. When the mage priest arrived at the village and Zerl found out why he was there, Zerl protested that there was anything wrong with him and that everyone was against him and blamed him for what happened to his fellow huntsman. He fled somewhere after that, but later that night he was found killing the mage priest in the mushroom temple by his wife. She ran from the temple screaming for help from the others. The next day the village and its residents were consumed by crystals. There was only one survivor, Zulel's son. The boy ran to the nearest village to get help, but when he returned the next day with help, the whole village was gone. All that was left was the footprints of a beast and the imprints where the crystals were. The apprentice, finishing his story as they got to the giant crystal bridge leading onto the mountain, stated that it's been 800 years since then, and every 200 years since then the crystal bridge is formed to the land where the floating mountain drifts to, and the monster emerges from the cave to turn towns into crystals to take back to the mountain's cave, for which reason no one knows. Right after saying all that and realizing he was talking the whole way, he decided to ask the champion about the rose he was carrying. While they crossed the bridge, the champion told him about his village Lillidue being attacked by Zerl and the priestess giving him the rose and the message she gave him. This story was of course much quicker than the rambling apprentices, and the champion didn't seem much like a talker anyways, and they had finished crossing the bridge and began moving toward the trail leading up the cave. But before the apprentice could ask any more questions to the quiet champion, Zerl fell from the cloud, landing with a loud crash behind them and cutting off their access to the bridge. Zerl gave a beastly laugh before howling to the sky and stating how happy was they brought the Sword of Time to him, and how he has been searching for it for a very long time.
So you are a creative person with your own imagination and ideas. Go to the Perspective Arts, where you can be creative and use your imagination to be a creator, and even earn real money along the way from others enjoying your creations. TPA posts 5 days a week different things that'll get your creative imagination flowing. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and on Mondays a picture will be posted like this, where you can create your own story that fits your perspective of what the picture is saying. On Tuesdays, icons and silhouettes will be posted that you can shape into your own picture like this. If you love voice acting or verbally telling a story, on Wednesdays a paragraph will be posted, and you can go from that to continue the story to something like this.
The House of Terror.
Maybe you're more creative with music. On Thursdays a sound clip will be posted, and you can turn something like this into something like this. And for all those directors, or just people who like making unique and sometimes funny videos, on Friday a theme or themes will be posted, and you will go from something like pizza, pirates, and superheroes to a video hopefully better than this one.
Pew pew pew, pew pew pew, pew pew pew. Arr, voiceover man, you can't stop me this time. Pew pew pew.
Pizza pirate, you've gone too far this time. Bang bang.
Ugh. Imaginary bullets. My only weakness. How did you know? I'll be back for the sequel.
Enjoy being creative and earning fans and money along the way. Join the community of the Perspective Arts and see what perspectives are out there. Remember, your only limitation is your imagination.
The apprentice was scared and shaking, holding out the sword to attack, when the champion puts his arm out in front of the apprentice to stop him from doing anything, while he glared with fire in his eyes at Zerl before pulling out his golden-handled cutlass from under his cloak and shouting, "You end now." Dashing forward at great speeds, the champion swings from his hip his weapon to slice the beast's belly, but right before contact Zerl clawed toward the champion, forcing him to swiftly flip horizontally over the arm and getting one slice downward on it as it passed below him, though to his surprise didn't even scratch him. Landing with a slide on the ground, the champion continued his momentum, running behind Zerl and trying to slice him up his backside, hoping for a weakness there. But all he got was a laugh from Zerl as he turned around to face the champion standing confused behind him. The impervious monster chuckles as he told him that it was futile, holding out his arm as to taunt the champion. Right then he dashed forward at him with his claws, the champion falling to his back to avoid the attacks while also thrusting his cutlass forward into the beast belly, but was only met with the sound of shattering as pieces of the sword fell to the ground. Looking at the beast in the eye, a mere breath away from each other, the champion shouted, "Use the sword of time." With that the apprentice jumped out of his cowardice, hearing Aurora's words spoken once more, and ran right toward the monster, the sword glowing in hand a bright green. Coming up behind Zerl, the apprentice jumped up and yelled fiercely as he swung downward to barely graze his back as Zerl twisted around as backhanding the apprentice, forcing him to drop the sword of time right under the beast as he was sent to the ground rolling backward. Zerl's eye glowed bright red with intense anger as he felt the pain on his back, and then proceeded to run up to the apprentice, sinking his claws into him, causing crystals to begin to form around the beast's claws, consuming the apprentice. Zerl squeezes tighter with his claws sunk into flesh, then slowly picking the body up toward him as it is gasps for life while crystals consume. As the apprentice's gasps get slower, he suddenly feels a black ooze spattering on his face and Zerl's face going blank. He begins falling from the claws of the monster and sees the blade of the sword of time sticking out Zerl's chest. But before he hits the ground, he is consumed completely by the crystals. Seeing out through the clear yellow crystal that surrounds him, he sees the champion holding the rose to his nose as he looks away, and in a bright green flash of light this hero and Zerl vanished with no trace. With them gone, the apprentice's sight faded to black. In amazement and a gasp of air, the apprentice opened his eyes to find himself back in Chronowood, standing in the town center with Aurora. Confused about what happened, he looks over to Aurora, who also looked puzzled from her apprentice's sudden loud gasp. The apprentice looked around and saw everyone preparing for an attack, and he got a weird sense of déjà vu. He then stared at the sword of time sitting again in the stone with runes, questioning what had actually happened. Was it a dream? He thought to himself. This led Aurora to look back and forth between the sword and her apprentice and then ask him what's going on. He then told the story of the hero from Lillidue for the first time, just as I am telling it to you. When he got to the end of the story where he gasped, the high priestess chuckled shortly as if a joke, and then as she saw the seriousness of her apprentice, she looked back at the sword with real concern in her eyes. Suddenly running over into the center was one of the mages Aurora sent out days earlier to a nearby village for protection. Out of breath, the gasped out that the monster was spotted in the village of Lillidue. Aurora's eyebrow raised and she asked what happened. The mage told her something strange happened and none of the other mages from the village know what to do, so she returned to her for counsel. Aurora looked over at her apprentice and then looked back at the mage to tell her what was so strange. The mage told her that the monster was beginning to attack, but suddenly when the village's champion appeared in their defense, they both disappeared without a trace. Aurora's face looked worried and she glanced back at her apprentice, asked the mage if the champion wore a long bright red tattered double cape, her apprentice softly saying the words with her as to help her remember what he said. The mage was shocked at the question and quickly affirmed that she was corrected and asked her how she had known. Aurora became stern and told her not to worry and to recall all the mages from all the villages back to Chronowood, and tell the people of Lillidue to come as well. She said they are going to throw a big banquet and her apprentice has a story to tell them. That night they did have the banquet in the center of town, and the apprentice told the story. At the end of the story, High Priestess Aurora revealed a life-size statue behind the Sword of Time of the Lost Champion, looking away with his rose exactly as the apprentice remembered the last movements of his friend. People were cheering with victory while others wept for their loved one's sacrifice. Master Rolf, are you the apprentice in the story? Asks a young boy sitting in a small courtyard of children intensely listening to the story. Master Rolf replies with a chuckle, why yes. That was me more than a century ago when I was closer to your age than I am now. That was my first adventure, but certainly not my last. A little girl stands up raising her hand asking worriedly, did you ever find out what happened to the champion? And what was his name? Master Rolf replies with a hint of sadness in his voice, oh yes. We all certainly did find out what happened to him later, but that is a story for another time. Now, everyone, it's time to go back to your classes. And his name? The girl asks again. Looking back as he was about to walk away, Master Rolf looks over his shoulder with a grin and said, his name was Rules. Epilogue. Moments after the hero of Lillidue, Rules floats curled up as if asleep in a black void with the only light is a red glow emanating from the rose he's holding. Where am I? Did I die? No, that can't be it. How do I escape? A familiar voice whispers to him, as long as there is a petal on this rose, you will know there is always hope. And with those words, Rules' eye slowly began to open.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Perspective. If you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe to see more. We upload Monday through Friday, and if you want to show off your own perspective, go to theperspectivearts.com, where your only limitation is your imagination. Links are in the description down below. Goodbye.